So if you're newer with us or this is your first Sunday, we've been journeying through Lent using this tool called the Enneagram. For those unfamiliar with Lent, it's just the 40 days leading up to Easter. Christians celebrate this as they reflect upon the 40 days Jesus spent in the wilderness, fasting, praying, wrestling, enduring temptation, and I think really trying to tap into who he was as a person. What is his identity? And that, I think, carried him through his life and really into his public ministry and allowed him to endure all the things that he endured. So the Enneagram on the next slide, Ennea just means 9 gram points or drawing, so a 9-pointed drawing. It's really just a circle. The symbol isn't what's important. Most people just use the numbers because they're neutral. We tack this one on. They're often common descriptors to find that. Really, the core thing to know is that we're all of these types. You're all of them in there, but we tend to, very early in life, gravitate towards one as a dominant type. And it's interesting because it helps us understand, first of all, we're not like everyone else. So if you've ever been with somebody else and you're like, why did you do it that way? Their motivations might be different than you. So we're hoping through this series that it develops some compassion and understand that people live and view things very differently than you do or than I do. And second, it's an inner journey. It's a journey of self-discovery, a journey of self-awareness, and particularly the Enneagram is meant to help us understand our own shadows and struggles. And I was thumbing through up here something somebody posted on Facebook, just in case anybody was looking and being like, well, the pastor is like surfing Facebook while we're singing. What the heck? I was looking for this. So give me a little grace. But it's a quote somebody posted from Richard Rohr, Wondrous Encounters, which is a Lenten devotional. And Rohr was actually one of the big pushers for Enneagram early on in like the 70s. And he wrote a book. But in Wondrous Encounters, he says this: our lack of self-knowledge and our lack of wisdom make humans do very stupid, self-destructive things. Guilty. Because humans cannot see their own truth very well. They do not read reality very well either. We all have our tragic flaws and blind spots. And so part of this journey, and if you're journeying with us in small groups, we've been going through this book too, The Road Back to You. How do we discover our true essence as well as our own shadows? So we become more self-aware and hopefully a little bit more clearly see reality or God and reality in the world in better ways. So we've invited our community as we've gone through this to fill out a survey. And it's really a quick survey on what type you think you are. So I want to invite you, if you haven't taken that survey and you have a smartphone, to go ahead and pull out your smartphone right now. And this is for people who have Facebook. I'll figure out a way to get the rest of you on board too. But we really thought it'd be neat to kind of poll our community and say, hey, what types of people, personalities, are at One Church, and what are the more common ones, and what are the least common ones here at One Church? So I want to invite you to pull out your smartphone, go on Facebook, find One Church. You can do that, Google or Facebook search One Church Chandler or One Church Arizona, and it will take you literally about a minute or less to fill out. The only requirement is to find your type or what you think you gravitate to. Just check that box. If you have any questions about anything else, we invite you to write those down as well. So today, we're going to journey through type 6 and type 7. And as a way of introduction, we have a short intro video that while you're filling out the survey, we'll go ahead and we'll watch this video together.
Moving on to the Enneagram Type 6, which is called the loyalist or the loyal skeptic. These people their saying would be more like a quote of, who cares if the glass is half empty or half full, it'll break anyway. They tend to be very, very loyal people to friends and as well as a group. They will likely join an organization where there's structure and order. These type of things are an authority that 6s can appeal to in order to create the order in the midst of the chaos of the world in which they experience. And because they're in the thinking triad, they will get lost in their thoughts of how things can go wrong. 6s typically see the world as kind of like a threatening place, chaotic and where all these things can go wrong, and they'll plan ahead to how to the best prevent things from going wrong, from dangers to encroach on their life. An example of a famous six could be like Hugh Grant, and I would actually say George Bush. The speaking style of a type 6 would be like the apologetic or the shotgun approach. Because of the need for a authority structure and something to appeal to, as well as the speaking style of apologetics, as well as the desire to avoid the dangers of the world, sixes will often group in a religious institution and find solace in those. They will hammer on the book, go by the rules. They will be afraid to exit that group because what lies outside of it is chaos or hell. Sixes will be the most likely to go through construction and less likely to go through deconstruction, because deconstruction reminds them of the chaos that lies outside in the wilderness. It'll be very hard for a six to get them to go against the rules that have been established. And if you're coming into the group and you're new, they'll be the most skeptical of people who are coming into the group. Sixes will often do great as people who want to uphold the order of law, maybe policemen. They may be great lawyers. They may be great people in the military too, to be loyal to their country, patriots and whatnot. A song type for a type 6 would be like Born in the USA by Bruce Springsteen or Proud to be an American.
It's not true of all type 6s. As we dive into type 6, I just want to remind you, not all 6s will be exactly the same. In fact, this is one of the hardest types to talk about in a short period of time. Last week, Angie and I hit on the type 4 and type 5, probably the most complex types. 6s are probably the most diverse types. And so if you got 6 6s together in a room, you'd be like, what is anything that they share in common here? And it comes to the core motivation. So really that's what the Enneagram gets at, is what is your core motivation? For a 6, the core motivation to feel safe, secure, and to have support. So they live, as many of us tend to do at times, with their feelers out. Are you safe? Can I trust you? Is this institution safe? And so they can be a little skeptical at first, and after a while they will be some of the most loyal people you will ever meet. Some of the titles that are used is loyalist, questioner, or guardian. Those are different titles that have been used before. Next slide on the descriptors. These are things that kind of describe this Enneagram type 6 person. They're trustworthy, committed, loyal, thoughtful, protective, responsible. And then when under stress or in their unhealth, they can sometimes be anxious, skeptical, defensive, or suspicious. And like every type, they have unhealth, average health aspects. And as we'll share in just a little bit, they move towards different numbers as they grow and integrate or as they go to stress. So actually, there's a line that connects the 9 and the 6. So in stress, I go to the 6. The lower side of the 6, which can be very anxious, uncertain, indecisive. So I will do my best not to just hone in on the negative side of the 6, because that's what I know and what I feel when I am under stress. Some 6s say of themselves, I am preoccupied with safety and security. I greet everything with a doubting mind and contrary thinking. They're sometimes called the devil's advocate. My vigilance, active imagination, and intuition help me anticipate and avoid problems. I question authority and people until they gain my trust. I sometimes procrastinate because of fear of making the wrong decision. And again, we all have part of this within us, right? So even as we're saying this, I'm sure we're all like, oh yeah, I'm like that at times. It's just 6s can kind of live here much more often than the rest of us. So every type has a virtue and a vice. Their virtue for the 6s is courage, and the vice is fear. It's really anxiety. So in the road back to you that we're doing with our small groups, the authors decipher fear and anxiety this way. By the way, fear, the 5, 6, and 7 are all in the fear triad, and they all deal with fear in different ways, really different ways. So the 6 is actually, it's more anxiety. And they decipher it this way. Fear is that feeling when somebody's chasing you and you're like, I got to get away, or there's a lion in the bushes, like I need to do something now. Anxiety is more like, I wonder, what if somebody were chasing me right now? What would I do? Or what if there was a lion in the bushes? So it's more about what if situations. And so it's much more about anxiety. Sixes, more than any other type, will struggle with anxiety. Multiple sixes I know have anxiety issues in some form or another. We talked about that in ones a little bit, but in different ways, because they're always scanning. Again, are you safe? Can I trust you? Which can make them really intuitive about people's motivations at the same time. So all of our sort of gifts is also our curses. In a way, it's the same side. It's the same. I always say the same side of the coin. It's the opposite side of the same coin. Your strengths can also be your weaknesses. Next slide. Anybody know who this character is? Doesn't that make you want to go watch that movie? You're like, I haven't seen that in forever. The lion, right? What was he after? Courage. Yes. You guys do remember. He's a great example of an unhealthy six through most of the movie. Right? You have the lion, the king of the forest, the king of the jungle, supposed to be this person of great courage, and yet is fearful and anxious most of the time until he finds the courage within him. So this is an example of an unhealthy six moving. What do they look like in health is when they grasp that courage, that virtue. Courage, by the way, is not I don't fear anything. It's just I might fear something or be anxious, but I'm stepping out despite that. And that's the health aspect of a six. So where do they go to? Next slide, in health and in stress. So again, like I said, the 9 and the 6 are connected here. So I go to a 6 in stress. The 6, who oftentimes is anxious, will in health begin to be less anxious, more peaceful, more adaptable. And in stress, will take on the low characteristics of the 3. Meaning sometimes they can be ultra competitive, or that anxiety heightens and we got to do this and this and this and this, and all achieving oriented. And so I have a short video here of 2 6s that I think represent. The first one talks about what it looks like for her to go to stress and health. And the second is, what does it look like for a 6 parent in the world that we live in today? So let's go ahead and watch this video.
So for me, a 6 looks like there's always an undercurrent of anxiety or questioning or doubting or not trusting. In most situations, it can take a long time for me to warm up to people, trust a situation, things of that nature. In health, I moved to a 9, and for me, it looks like I'm really flexible, adaptable, really comfortable with all kinds of people and situations. In unhealth, I moved to a 3, which looks for me very controlling. I get wound up in logistics, and it's easy for me to give an illustration for that. About a year ago, my dad was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer, and my parents live in Kansas, so immediately I panicked and thought of all of the ways that I could try and not cure his cancer, but solve the logistical issues, because he was going to do his treatment here at Mayo Clinic. And so at the time we had 1 vehicle, so I told Jim, we're going to buy a car. We're going to do X, Y, and Z and try and manage my parents' experience, take all of the stress off of them so my dad could focus on getting better. Very much wound up in controlling the situation, because that lessened my anxiety in a very strange 6 sort of way. But once I realized what was happening, I was able to calm myself down. We didn't buy a second car. My dad ended up, he's cancer-free, 9 months now. So it all worked out, but I could see where I quickly moved to a 3 when the stress was pretty significant.
As a 6, I find that I crave stability, consistency, things to be routine. So one of the biggest things that I have had to deal with has been, becoming a parent. So going into that great unknown, in my head I would plan out, everything, like every possible scenario, every way things could go, but I could never really be certain, and that lack of certainty was just daunting for me. It was scary. And so, going through that with my first child, and then again with my second child, and then just trying to be comfortable with the unknown and comfortable with the uncertainty is a very, very difficult thing for me. Very much craving, just routine, like I said, consistency and those types of things.
So, sixes crave certainty. It's the part within all of us that desires certainty. I still remember coming home with our firstborn child, taking him out to the car and driving like 10 miles under the speed limit. And like, oh my gosh, the universe, God, whatever is giving us this kid, and we don't know what we're doing. What if we screw it all up? What if somebody hits us? And so I think we can all resonate with that to some extent. Sixes, more than any other type, crave certainty, which could mean faith is very difficult. For all of us, I think we all would like certainty, right? We would all like to know what happens when we die. We'd really like to know exactly what that looks like. And we've talked about this multiple times. For many of us, we grew up in an environment where it was almost faith and certainty were the same thing. And we've gone through this sort of deconstruction of, well, actually faith is much more about trusting. It's about stepping out into the unknown and not being certain for things. So if you're a six and you're here at one church, you have stepped out and gone through some deconstruction, as Anthony said in the beginning, that's hard for sixes to do, where they crave that certainty and that sort of external authority, and it's safe, and it's nice, and it's neat. One of the examples we have in Scripture is Peter, of course. By the way, just to make things more confusing, as if they're not already, for the six, there's actually two kinds of sixes. There's what they call a phobic six and a counterphobic six. The phobic six will take on anxiety and kind of move away from it. The counterphobic six will take on that anxiety and move towards it. So the idea of like, well, jumping out of an airplane with a parachute on. Well, what if it doesn't work? And what if I pull and nothing happens? Or what if the plane crashes? I don't know about that. Phobic will kind of step back. But the counterphobic will be like, well, what if I don't know, but I'm kind of anxious, so I'm going to do it, right? The counterphobic six will actually look a little bit more like an 8 at times, actually. Again, it comes back to the core motivations. Rebecca, who is up on the picture for the orphanage in South Africa, we were sitting down the first time, and she knows a lot about the Enneagram. So we were talking, and she told me she was a 6, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. And she talked about how she traveled to the Philippines, and she traveled to South Africa, and she traveled as an au pair to France. And I'm thinking, as a 9, I don't think I would ever do all of that stuff. Like, how can you be an anxious, fearful person? And it was that counterphobic part coming out. Like, oh, this is kind of scary, but I want to do it. Moving. So I think a misnomer when you get into like, oh, our 6 is always scared and huddled back and not willing to do anything. No, that's not true. That's not true at all. They might take that and move towards that. That's just something they have to wrestle with as they move forward. Does that make sense a little bit? And probably what's more accurate is all 6s kind of vacillate in between both of those. At times kind of shying away, and at other times almost engaging that to kind of overcome those fears. So Peter, we see a perfect 6, a great leader, one of the first leaders of the church. So we read in Matthew 14, after Jesus just fed 5,000 plus women and children, so probably a lot more than that, Jesus sends his disciples in a boat in the middle of the lake. And one thing we do before we read that, one thing that I love and always try to remind myself is, afterwards, Jesus disengages with himself and goes up by himself to pray. And we see Jesus modeling this time and time again. Whenever the crowds came and he engaged the crowds, he broke himself open and poured himself out. He made sure to reciprocate this sort of, I need to be poured into, right? I need to disengage for a little bit. I need to recenter myself, reconnect with who I am, the divine within me, and who I am and what I am called to do. And so it's important. I think it doesn't matter if you're 6. That's true of all of us. Are we engaging too much? Do we need to take some time to disengage? Hopefully this is what Lent is meant to be a little bit. Disengage. Some of us may be fasting social media or different things to kind of disengage a little bit. I need to take time for me. So they're in the boat. They freak out because they think they see a ghost. And the story goes, it's actually Jesus on the water. And so we read, Peter answered him, Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water. Doesn't sound like a 6, right? He said, come. So Peter got out of the boat, started walking on the water, came toward Jesus. But when he noticed the strong wind, he became frightened. Beginning to sink, he cried out, Lord, save me. And so whether you read this literally or metaphorically, I think the story is a story we've all encountered in our own lives. In a boat, in the safety of this boat, I am secure. I am safe. What's interesting here is nobody pressures Peter. None of the disciples are like, dude, you do it. No, you do it. Peter himself steps out. So we see this sort of counterphobic, man, this is scary. I want to step out. Jesus, tell me to step out and I'll do it. And so we see Peter here in a moment moving in integration, in faith, in trust. Okay, so he steps out, right? And as long as his focus is on where he is headed and what he is going, he has that faith, that trust. But then we hear about the wind blowing, right? We've all felt this in our life, like, okay, we're doing this. Something happened. Oh my gosh, no. And then we feel like we're sinking. Our fears kind of encapsulate us, engulf us, pull us down. And he cries out, God, save me. We see kind of the counterphobic part in Peter to when Jesus was betrayed that night. And what happens? The Roman soldiers come up, and what does Peter do? Pulls out, whooshing, got a sword, the fisherman, right? Pulls out, whooshing, bam, just goes up and cuts the ear off a guy. And Jesus has to go and kind of clean up his mess. I think it was a very counterphobic reactiveness from Peter, like, moving towards that. There's another story, of course. Jesus is moving towards his death and foreseeing probably, at least according to Matthew, what is coming. And so we read this story, Jesus gathering his disciples and says, but after I am raised up, I will go ahead of you to Galilee. And this is great because this is Lent time, leading up to the time of his death. And so we enter into this story here. And Peter said to Jesus, though all become deserters because of you, I will never desert you. And Jesus said to him, truly I tell you, this very night before the cock crows, you will deny me 3 times. And Peter said to him, even though I must die with you, I will not deny you. You see that counterphobic, right? Coming up. And so said all of the other disciples. Again, 6s can be great leaders. Peter's leading everyone else here. Unfortunately, he's leading and reacting against something. And then we know the story, right? Peter goes and denies Jesus 3 times. You know, I know Judas gets a bad rap for sure, but sometimes I wonder what betrayal was harder. Judas, who said, okay, I know this guy and there's something going on, but I'm going to sell him over. Or Peter, the close friends that's like, I've never associated with that guy. I don't know him at all. Interesting. So Peter, of course, denies Jesus. And then their eyes lock or whatever, they meet, and Peter realizes what he has done. And like we've all experienced before, when we like, oh shoot, I screwed up, right? Then shame sets in. And Peter just runs away and hides. And we see this beautiful picture in John, who follows up, where Jesus comes to Peter and 3 times says, do you love me? And scholars interpret this differently, but one of the things that you could say is Jesus at that very moment knows the shame that Peter feels and goes in and he says, you are deeply loved. I know what you did. Rise up. I know who you are. It's okay, Peter. See, it's at those moments of brokenness when we feel broken and humiliated, that is when transformation and God's grace really just comes in. It's so unfortunate that And I've seen this. It actually made me walk away from the church for a while because I saw at the moment of brokenness in people's lives, what does the church do? You shouldn't have. How dare you? Whatever. Shame. It's like they're full of shame. You don't need extra shame to bile and kind of bury them, right? And it's like that is the very moment they need love and grace and acceptance. It's okay. It's okay. That's when transformation happens. Not when we I got all my stuff together. I'm totally self-aware. I know everything. I'm doing great. It's those moments where you're like, oh, I know. I've struggled. I've been there. It's okay. That's the moments where I think God's grace really comes in and when transformation really happens. So what do sixes do well? Next slide. Some of the strengths of the sixes, they're loyal friends and employees. They're great problem solvers. By the way, I've found this, as Angie said before, it's great to know your strengths and weaknesses and know other people at least have strengths where your weaknesses lie. And so there's a couple of sixes on our board here, and I'm realizing I'm so extremely thankful for sixes because I'm a 9, and I'm just sort of go into optimistic situations, be like, yeah, cool, let's just do this. And well, what about this? I don't know, we'll just work it out, it'll just happen. So you need other people. I'm so thankful we have a type 1 who is leading our missions because I'm like, yeah, let's do this missions thing. And she organizes it all, gets all these charts. I'm like, yeah, that's probably important when you're taking a group of 45 people, outside of the nation to have all of the, so I realize I'm not detail oriented and sixes are great. Well, there's something coming up. We need to plan for this. What about this? And what if we do this? Will people think this way? This is where sixes flourish in those situations. They're great in a crisis, oftentimes because they're thinking through of all the worst case scenarios. Many sixes will say, I go into a room, I know where the exits are, I know what will happen. And so they're ready for that thing. Because of that, they're intuitive. They pick up on little things that other people like me, oh, you're great, you're wonderful. A 6 will be they're a little standoffish at first. And they're like, are you safe? And so that also makes them kind of intuitive. They also can be so much fun. Some great comedians, I think Ellen DeGeneres is a 6, and others, because their mind works so fast. And the road back to you, the authors say, every business needs a loyal skeptic who isn't afraid to ask hard questions or point out the flaws in a plan. So sometimes I think they can be misunderstood because they might look at it and be like, well, what about this and what about that? And if they do that, they're loyal to that thing. They want to see that thing succeed. They're trying to help. And if you allow them, your business, your organization, I think will be a lot better. Spiritual growth for 6s. This one's hard. This one's so hard for all of us, but especially hard for 6s. Release the quest for certainty, control, and pursue faith. In other words, in trust. In the road back to you, the authors write, 6s need to be encouraged to doubt themselves less and trust themselves more. They are stronger and more resourceful than they know. They've just been going about transformation in the wrong way. They think the antidote to fear is courage, but they can never seem to muster enough to do the job. So surely that's not the answer. What they need to develop is faith, which is different from courage, and that it doesn't require certainty. Now they become courageous, but it's not in mustering, I need courage, I need to just step out. No, it's about faith. It's about saying, I don't know, but I'll step out. And they'll find the courage in that way. Meditation, centering prayer. As Angie said last week, I think this is helpful for every one of the types. For the 6, this might be the most helpful thing and one of the most difficult things. And here's why. Let me see if I can find this. I thought this was interesting. A 6's thinking constantly wonders, doubts, and questions. Thoughts in the head of a 6 may sound like a committee meeting, constantly coming up with diverse opinions for and against whatever is going on. So if you're a 6, you probably resonate with that. There's a committee going on in your head. For many of us, we all have something. We all have a voice that's constantly going on. For sixes, they have a committee of voices. What about this? And if we do this, what? And so for sixes, meditation and centering prayer can be even more difficult because it's shutting that down. And also, I know for sixes, spirituality sometimes, well, what if this is wrong? Or what if this isn't true? And finding that way. But it's sometimes in those things that are hard for us to do that we'll experience the most growth. Noticing your anxiety. Again, a lot of this is awareness for a six. Like, I struggle with anxiety. Where does that come up for you? And how do you deal with anxiety individually? It might be simple things like exercise or sleep, whatever, or it might be meditation, or I need time in nature, whatever it is, noticing those anxieties and how do I help combat those anxieties, relieve those anxieties. Trust yourself more. Easier said than done, right? Just trust yourself more. Yeah, that's hard. Again, I think we all could use this, but sixes for sure. So how do you move towards that trust? In one of the books on the Enneagram, Biblical Characters in the Enneagram, they say the movement from anxiety to security, trust, and peace, remember as they kind of move towards that 9, is basic to a six's growth. For a 6, I think it's recognizing that you struggle at times with trusting yourself. And it's also finding people who will help you develop greater trust in yourself. Maybe being honest with some people close to you. I'm struggling with this. I don't need you to tell me what to do, but I really need you when I come to you to tell me how and ask me questions to help me figure it out and help me better trust myself. Also, looking back. In those moments where you're struggling with anxiety, looking back at all the times that you overcame that anxiety. We all get caught up in those things, in those moments where it's like, oh my gosh, I don't know. And we all need that time to stop, but sixes, more than any other, stop, look back. You've journeyed through so much. It's going to be okay. Or as the country music singer Darius Rucker says, it's going to be all right. All right? Yes, I've been on a country music kick, I confess. You can pray for me. It's okay. Steps towards growth. So a 6, hopefully these things will help you. And hopefully if you're not a 6, I think they're still important for all of us, especially that first one. I think that's where a lot of us are at. We don't know so much. And yet we desire and seek after something many call God, and others in here, as we've known, refer to God in a different way. And that's okay. And we're moving in those directions. So in a moment, we're going to transition to type 7s. And we have a friend of Angie's who's going to share, who is a type 7. So all you 7s out here, you're like, yes, finally, move on, get to the fun guy. We're getting there. We're getting there. By the way, Dennis and I were both joking because we're both really sore from like this weekend, which I guess happens once you get to a certain point. I know some of you guys are like, wait till you get older. You're too young. I get that. But I want to invite you before we intro to the type 7 through a video to join me in a short prayer for all 6s. And I think even if you're not a 6, you can connect to this. So will you pray with me? God, you are within me and beyond me, forever present. Your love enfolds me as I go about my days. I am not alone. My suspicions fade when held to your unwavering assurance of me. Empty me of my anxieties and imaginings. Relieve my fears. Create in me a refuge for trusting myself. Remind me of my inner resources and powers. All I need is within me. My act is to call this forth and trust as I stand on my solid foundation, knowing your steady ground is within me. I move forward in an uncertain world. Guide me as I travel the path of courage, so I may lean into myself when the waters are troubled, having faith in the unfolding, growing mystery into my own authority. Hold me in the fearful times, and hold me in the fearless times. In your holy ground I rise to offer my full and powerful self in each moment. Amen.
Type 7 is the enthusiast or the epicure, actually. They're the fun types. They're about joy and happiness and pleasures throughout life. I guess a quote that would be good for them is, more is better. They want to try everything pretty much at least once. These are the people who will probably most likely break out into dance if you're at a party. If there's a group of friends that's into this and a group of friends that's into that, they want to have them all together. They want to have one big party and be inclusive and include everybody all together and have everybody get along and have a great time. If you ever ask a 7 what they're interested in, they would have a long list. It would be like a scroll, and they'd be like, I'm into music, I'm into bands, I love bands, I like parties, I like tasting different foods, I want to explore this place, I want to see this and do this. They want to just have the most full life of experiences, and they don't really like downtime, or a lot of times they don't like to be bored. And a weekend without plans and without something that they want to do, as it gets closer, they'll probably be more anxious and like, well, I need to fill this in, I need to fill this time up with something. And they will have a lot of different talents. They'll be talented at this, talented at that, but nothing that they're like masterful at. They like to be pretty good at guitar, pretty good at like singing, pretty good at dancing, but not like necessarily to go to the extreme where like they're the best at it. They like to just get their hands into a lot of different things, and sometimes they'll spread themselves thin. Sometimes 7s will have so many things that they can't even keep up with it because they decided to wear too many hats. Their speaking style is more like storytelling, especially with jokes. People who are 7s, they like to tell jokes in their stories and have everybody have a good time. And famous type 7s would be, like, I would say Kevin Hart is a great example of a type 7 energy. Very fun, comedic guy. Other type 7s would be like Galileo Galilei, Hugh Hefner. Another type 7 that is recognizable as far as being a lot into pleasures and experiences and having a big party would be like King Solomon. King Solomon threw like probably the biggest feast and party to create the temple. He had artists from all around the world, people who are good at their crafts, and had them all together to create this big, huge like party. And then the song type for a type 7 would be like Natasha Bedingfield's Unwritten. Most of their life is unwritten, and they're going to have this series of the next best thing, and type 7s often will feel like the grass is greener on the other side.
Being a 7 is crazy. It's not only crazy to be one, but you think we're crazy. So many times in my life, I've heard, can't you just keep a job? Why don't you just settle into something? There's got to be something that you can focus on. Focus is a good word. I love that one. And I can't. My introduction is up on the screen behind me. And it's crazy. The best part about understanding the Enneagram and moving into some form of health in that is being able to look at yourself in the mirror and say, I'm crazy. I'm really thankful that any type 7 is actually here. You might be hungover, but you're here, so thank you. Yesterday was St. Patrick's Day, and I understand the struggle that you went through this morning. Getting out of bed was total and utter hell for you. So thank you very much for being here. The words on the screen are true. Our core motivating factor is fun. Nothing exists if it isn't fun. I don't care about your lists. I don't care about your rules. I don't care about the boxes. And I'll take them all so long as I can dance in them. That really is all we care about. Go ahead and go to the next slide for me. And the next one. I'm really glad that Angie told me I couldn't cuss, so I did the best I could. Oh, man. I'm really grateful to be up here. It's such an honor to be able to do this. Obviously, being a 7, speaking and entertaining are some of my favorite things to do. And so, as I've traveled through this journey with you, we keep asking the question, well, what does this mean? Every week, Angie or Aaron or whoever is speaking is getting up, trying to quickly get us to understand what the Enneagram is. What is it? How does it help? Next slide, please. There's a story in Romans chapter 7 where the Apostle Paul is saying, what I want to do good, I don't. What I don't want to do wrong, I do it anyway. Oh my God, it's the sin within me that does it. The strongest, most helpful thing that you can take away from the Enneagram is it totally and utterly removes these words from the narrative. If you will wrap your head around what the Enneagram is, it doesn't matter what your type is. You have the ability to outlive something that is scriptural. It doesn't have to be this way. And let me tell you that being a type 7, this was my justifying piece every time I did something really dumb. I don't know, I just have this sin nature that's in me. It's crazy. And I'm not saying that there isn't that. I'm not saying that we don't wrestle and struggle as humans. I'm just suggesting that if you will pour into the idea of self-discovery, you really can write a line through these words. It doesn't have to end with, I'm not really the one doing wrong. It is sin living in me that does it. What it can be is, I'm really, really ultra self-aware, and I actually know why I did that. Or I know how to avoid doing that now. We, as type 7s, love to eat and drink everything. Primarily the good things, but any of it, really. And so one place where this is for me is there's been times in my life where I've woken up hungover and been like, man, how did I get here? 7 shots of whiskey will do it. Like, I don't mean to make jokes about something so serious with our own lives, but it's true. We don't have to ask this question over and over and over and over and over and bang our heads against the religious wall about it. Next slide, please. One of there are people in the Bible who are Enneagram types. I don't know why I danced with my hands to explain that. The woman at the well. It's a really simple, short, wildly concise illustration of a type 7. Jesus is sitting, she comes up, he asks for some water. She says, why are you talking to me? I'm a chick, and I live in Samaria. You shouldn't do that. And he's like, yeah, but I'm thirsty. And they go through this interaction, and he mentions better water. He mentions a living water. So for a type 7, she's like, wait, there's water there, but you have better water? Tell me, sir, about this better water that you have that would lead me never to thirst again. That's a real thing. I have other notes that are right here. Found them. So they're going through this interaction, and Jesus says, actually, go get your husband to help draw some more water. I don't have one. You're right, you don't. You've had 5. And the man that you're living with now is not even your husband. There's an illustration there about type 7's inability to commit sometimes, their inability to want to try everything. In this example, in this illustration, it's wanting to try everyone for her, but wanting to try everything. What Anthony said in the video is right. I know how to do a lot of things. None of them am I an expert at, except having fun. The guitar is an example. My daughter plays the guitar, and so I'm learning to do that again. And somebody asked me the other day if I play the guitar, and I was like, sort of. I can do anything, sort of. Thanks. Glad you got it. But in this moment where Jesus in some way calls her out and says, you're right, you don't have one, you've had 5, and the man you're with now isn't even your husband. What he didn't do was shame her. But what he said is, what you have just said is quite true. And what he's referencing is her ability to say, I don't have a husband. Because she could have. She could have gone to get the man who was living with her and said, listen, dude, you got to pretend to be my husband because that's what I called you. And she didn't. And for type 7s, that is not easy to do. The hardest thing for us to do actually is sit in the midst of a really painful moment without dancing. We hate it. Vulnerability is really, really difficult. Not experiencing the pain necessarily, but just sitting down into the pain is very difficult. And I love that Jesus honored her in this way and didn't shame her in this illustration. They then discussed spirit and truth. Where do we worship here or do we worship where you are? Because our ancestors have the thing here that we worship here, and Jesus just sort of silences her and says, there will come a day where we will worship in spirit and truth everywhere. Jerusalem, Samaria, America, Africa. It'll happen everywhere. And so for the 7 brain, what Jesus allowed her to do was be free. There now was no restriction for where she could worship, which, if you would understand a 7, will actually make them worship. When you take the box away, we can sit in the box. It's when you put the box around that we're kicking and screaming and fighting and digging a hole to get outside of the box. Suggest that we do something, maybe. But if you tell us to do something, see ya, even if we have a desire to do that thing. Lent is hard AF. And I have cheated. I have cheated on Lent. It's very difficult. I want to participate in Lent. But the fact that it is a box around me, I'm like, what if I swear to God, this happens in my brain and happened when I drank beer on a day that I wasn't going to because beer is what I gave up. I was like, but if I do it today and I don't drink beer on Sunday, which is the Lent cheat day, maybe it's okay. Justified. Right into having that beer. The freedom for type 7s is amazing. And it's hard for a lot of other types. Particularly type 1s have a hard time with us. My daughter's tested as a type 1. And last week we were driving, and she goes, Dad, are you ready for your talk? And I was like, in my brain. And she goes, what does that mean? And I was like, well, she said, haven't you planned it out and written it out? And I was like, hell no. But it's here. And she goes, oh my God, Dad, that's such a type 7 thing to do. And I was like, yeah. So suggest, ask, don't tell. And I love that Jesus did this for the woman at the well. He told her to worship. He just told her she didn't have to do it in a confined set of geographical space or rule. When Jesus looks at her and she's talking about the Messiah and he says, actually, that's me. I was reading an old Bible that I have yesterday, preparing, the day before. And I wrote, that is unreal. That moment in time is unreal. Should Jesus have been who he said he was, and should this woman have actually been there having this conversation about the Messiah, and he says, actually, that's me. What? Selfie! I'm in. That moment in history is so bananas. So bananas. And I love that that's how Jesus ended, really, his interaction with her. Because what he didn't tell her to do is go and sin no more. What he didn't tell her to do was kick the man out of her house. What he didn't tell her to do was anything other than I am he. And then, in true 7 fashion, she ran and told everybody that she could find. She was like, I found him. You want to know? I found him. Guess what? He's over here. He's told me everything I ever did in my life. Found him. We're often known as the enthusiast. This lady was enthusiastic because Jesus had to stay in Samaria for 2 extra days. Because the amount of people that she told to come and see, come and witness, be here with this guy. Da, 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 I found him. Such a beautiful story. Next slide, please. Oh my God, it's such a beautiful story. So then to go into a couple of the details about how crazy we 7s really are. Our stress movement is the black and white piece of a type 1. When I'm stressed out, which thankfully doesn't happen that often, I move to like, everything is black and white. I'm gonna live, I'm gonna die, I'm broke, I'm rich, everything's gonna fall apart, everything is beautiful and put back together. It is very, very, very black and white when I'm stressed. I don't see color very well there. When I'm healthy, I was having a conversation not too long ago with somebody, and I said, surprisingly, I don't have to be the center of attention all the time. They were like, right. And I was like, no, what I mean is, because I do, what I mean is, I don't have to fight people to be the center of attention anymore. I can allow somebody else to sing and dance when I'm in the room. I didn't used to be that way. I used to be like, listen, I dance better than you. And it used to be very competitive for me. And now, gracefully, in some growth over the last handful of years emotionally, I'm able to just sit back and watch somebody else entertain a room. And that's that type 5, the observer. I'm able to sit back and just take it in instead of forcing myself on people, which is why most people get overwhelmed by 7s. One of the statements that I read that was wildly true is people love 7s for this amount of time and then go away to some other group until I'm ready to be entertained again. So we really are like the dancing monkey. Our vice is addiction and gluttony. This actually plays out in 2 very, very different ways for a 7. Because of the emotional piece, that we don't like to sit in the muck. 7s as parents can be the people who say, not my kid. It's not my child out there doing that. It's not my daughter sending those pictures on Snapchat. Nope, not mine. We don't want to deal with the idea that it could impede on our fun or our life. Nope. So in the emotional state, that vice is really hard. So it's healthy for 7s to learn how to say, yep, that could be my kid. Or yep, this is, vulnerability, go get it. This, I'm going to tell you about myself. I gave up beer for Lent. I did not give up booze for Lent, just beer. It was a caloric thing, not an alcohol thing. And because my vice is gluttony, most 7s will appear to be addicts of whatever it is that they love. They could be addicted to the fun, the people, they could be addicted to booze, they could be addicted to food, they could be addicted to whatever it is that they're into, because we just love it. We love it. I'm not saying that we aren't addicts. I'm not saying that isn't the bend for us. I'm just saying that even if you aren't, you would appear to be one to most other people. Most people would say, why do you have to drink whiskey every day? The response from a 7 is, why wouldn't you? It's there and it's delicious. So why wouldn't you? Why do you have to drink 36 cups of coffee? Why don't you drink 36 cups of coffee? Our virtue is easily misunderstood as well. I've had some friends recently, one of them very graciously said, before understanding the Enneagram and knowing that you were a type 7, I had a really hard time understanding you. I didn't understand why you would do things. Now knowing that and knowing you, it's much easier to be your friend. What, you want to move with no notice? Crazy. You want to move again? Wild. And you're moving again. The virtue that we have that can be often misunderstood because we're bouncing a lot. We want to learn how to paint, we want to learn how to sew, we want to learn how to type, we want to learn how to play the guitar, we want to learn how to rock climb, we want to learn how to do everything. That our vision and our ability to be innovative is often misunderstood for an inability to follow through. Again, I'm not saying we have the ability to follow through. I'm just saying it's often called, they're just unable to follow through with that, so they're going to this. When really, at least in my life, I'm the strongest person in the room if I'm just allowed to think. And if I'm just allowed to tell you how beautiful the colors could be, and somebody else can put those colors into motion, there is not a human on the planet that is better than me at that. And it's often misunderstood, especially by some other types who like rules and structure and steady and all of those things. I don't even know how to spell structure, let alone live inside of it. I'm kidding. If you are a 7 and you're in the room, I'll do this in reverse order. If you're not a 7 and you're in the room, that's most of you. Be gracious to the 7s that you meet as you understand the Enneagram. Please. Not because we need to be coddled, but because everybody tells us that we're immature. Everybody else tells us that we can't focus and that we can't stay in our lane and that we have an inability to follow through. Trust us. We get it. Oh my God, do we get it? Because it isn't just you telling us, it's us telling us as well. After so many years, surprise, after so many years of being told, why can't you just stay in this job, in this path, in this whatever? And now understanding that it's because I don't need to. That's what makes me stronger as a type 7, when I understand that I don't need to stay. There are 8 other types who will stay. You don't need me to. There's such immense freedom in understanding that. So please be gracious to your type 7s. If you are a 7, let me encourage you with this. You are absolutely banana sandwich crazy. Deal with it. Deal with it. Not crazy like they're crazy. Crazy like it's beautiful what's happening in here. Don't let it destroy you. If you work a job that you hate, quit that thing and go be as 7 as you can be, unless you have bills to pay. Then create a plan. I've used so many foreign words today. Oh man, this is so much fun. I'm a 7 with an 8 wing, which means I not only am crazy, but I'm aggressive. I don't do stress very well. I don't like rule. I had somebody ask me the other day, how do you organize something? And I laughed. I legitimately was like, I don't. My organization is not having any. I think I'm just crossed the middle line of health. I would like to give myself that much credit. Unhealthy 7s can be really scary people because they don't know how to turn it off. You guys have mentioned every week that the centering prayer and the things that can help all of us. Here's the beautiful piece of all of us being all types, is that our fears are the same. None of us want to be misunderstood. None of us like to be left with our own thoughts. None of us like to be doubted or criticized or shamed for who we are. None of us want that. And so the things that help a type 1 or a type 2 or a type 4, I get confused as a 4 a lot as well. People are like, oh my God, you roll your pants, you're a 4. I'm like, I'm actually not, I'm a 7. Give me a microphone and you'll find it out. We all need to be centered. It's the growth aspect of being a human. Centering prayer, meditation, those things are good for all of us because our fears are all the same, but it's how we play them out that is different. When one type may have that 6, may retreat, we just dance. We feel the same fear. We just play it off like it's fun, which can be really annoying. I'm really grateful for the opportunity, thank you, to share what it is like to be a 7. The Enneagram has been such a weird thing because I talk about it a lot. You can go to the last slide. I talk about it a lot, and most people are really confused when I try to explain what the Enneagram is, and I've learned how to create language around it that makes it digestible, I hope. And that language has been around, we're just all humans, right? And it isn't that we're just all broken. It's that we have bends in particular ways. And it's understanding how you bend and how far you can flex so you don't break. Doesn't matter what type you are. It's the most peaceful thing that you can do is set yourself into a space where you're learning about the person in the mirror. Doesn't matter your type, doesn't matter your age, your race, how much money you make, none of that matters. If you can look at the person in the mirror and not think they're a total douche, you're winning. It's not a cuss word, right? I'm still good. I said it and I was like, oh God. Mama Angie gonna get me. That peace is something that I pray for all of us. My only prayer for each type, for each and every one of us, is that we continually ask God for help. Not help to be less broken, help to be more revealed to ourselves and to the people around us in our most full extent. Worship team can come back up. After this, if you have questions about the Enneagram, if for the last handful of weeks you've been like, that's great that they keep talking about this, and the symbol's kind of cool, I still don't get it. I'm going to do just a short Q&A in the hall. It can be about type 7 stuff. It can be about the Enneagram as a whole. You're welcome to join me or go eat lunch. If you're a type 7, you're going to go eat lunch. Let's not be silly. Thank you guys for being patient with learning through this process. I know that Aaron and Angie and the rest of the staff, the rest of the humans with One Church, care deeply about not just the inclusive love of God, but the all understanding that the human brain can give itself when it looks internally. And so thank you. And my ending prayer is simply, God, please help us.